And we're live. Hello. My name is Felicia. Welcome to REEDSY'S Live, our ongoing series of webinars where we invite guests from the world of publishing to show you how to write and publish better books. I'm part of the learning team here at REEDSY, and I'm standing in for REEDSY Live's regular host, Martin, today. And today we have a very special live editing session with Tom Bromley, the creator of REEDSY'S How to Write a Novel course. And he's going to be live editing submissions from our viewers and sharing tips on how to improve your writing along the way. And ahead of the webinar, we asked people to send in excerpts of around 500 words, ideally from their first chapter, for a chance to be featured. And thanks so much to everyone who sent in their writing. We got a huge response. We got over 1,000 submissions. And we'll unfortunately not be able to feature all the pieces today, but stick around to see if yours got picked. We'll be getting to about 4 pieces, hopefully by the end of the hour. And yeah, for today's session, we'll be drawing back the curtain and showing you an editor at work, giving you an idea of the feedback they would give while editing, the kind of stuff they would pick up on. It's also a bit of a sneak peek of the type of editing session that Tom regularly hosts as part of his novel writing course, where he live edits writing from students. And if you're interested in learning more about Tom's course, you can head to reedsy.com/learning, and we'll also be chatting a little bit more about it later on. And our next cohort begins on September 2nd, and we'll share a special discount code for those of you joining us today at the webinar, so stick around for that at the end as well. But yeah, without further ado, let me introduce my guest today. So my guest today is the head of learning here at REEDSY. He's also an editor, author and ghostwriter of 15 books, including prize winners and international bestsellers. In addition to that, he's also taught novel writing for over a decade at institutions like Falmouth University and Faber Academy. Tom, welcome. How are you today?
I'm very good. How are you doing, Felicia?
Yeah, I'm doing really well. I'm very excited to kind of get into the editing and see the kind of pieces that you picked for today's session, and the kind of comments that you'll give on that.
Yes, brilliant. Thank you everyone for tuning in. I'm sorry we're slightly late starting. I had a problem with my microphone, but hopefully you can all hear me okay now. Yeah, it's been fascinating. So I think as you were saying, we've had just over 1,000 kind of submissions, and I've read a lot of beginnings of novels over the last few days. A real variety of stuff, both in terms of different genres, in terms of quality. I've tried to pick a kind of spread of pieces that are, I think, of a particular interest or kind of highlight kind of particular themes, which I'll talk about in the next hour or so. I would say just my overall comment, I would say, from kind of reading this kind of massive introductions, thinking about beginnings and doing them slightly differently, I always think is kind of so important. Thinking about I read a number of pieces with characters kind of waking up at the beginning. I'm always slightly wary of those as a start. And actually there was a number of pieces kind of fantasy-wise where characters are waiting for a ship to come in. So if either of those are something that you did yourself, I would just be aware that you're not the only person to have that idea as a beginning. So coming up with something different and something new and distinctive, I think is important. But anyway, shall I get stuck into the first piece? I'm just going to share my...
Yeah, we've got a few here to get through, so let's get stuck into the first one.
So
Let's see if
here
we can
we
get the
go.
first one here up on the screen.
Yeah, so what for those who haven't seen one of these sessions before, what I'll do, I'm going to read the extract first, and then I am going to go through the details of the edit, what I think works and what could be tweaked. And this first piece I've chosen is by Anna, and this is the beginning of a piece called Memory of a Sunflower, which she describes as being in the sort of mystery stroke suspense category. One remarkable thing about my mother is that she hardly ever cried. Not when I broke my arm and had to be rushed to the hospital, and not even when Dad died after a long and exhausting battle with cancer. Mom tackled me with unwavering determination, as if it were a game she couldn't afford to lose, often forgetting to consider the feelings of others. After Dad's death, she seemed indifferent, but it was also when her stoic strength shone the brightest. She swiftly put our lives back on track as if nothing had happened, and only later did I realise how much she sacrificed to provide us with stability and a sense of normalcy. In my 16 years, I've only ever seen her cry once, and to this day, it is the only story in my life that is worth telling. I remember it happened in March because the mornings were still cold and misty, but the trees were eager to bloom, their green buds peeking from the branches. And at that time, I was engulfed in studying, trying to tackle the midterms in a way that would allow me to keep my scholarship. One particular day, I was especially stressed because of the upcoming biology project, so that was all I was thought about when I was pedalling my bicycle home. A long and tedious afternoon of studying awaited me, so I was in no rush. Our house sat atop a small hill, surrounded by the forest, with only one paved path leading into town. Despite the cold weather, I was sweating and gasping for air as I pedalled uphill. Upon finally reaching the front garden, I was met with a shouting, deep and angry, like a booming thunder, coming from inside the house. I froze, half standing, half sitting on the saddle, panic rising in me like a tide, rendering all the previous worries unimportant. Were we being robbed? Are you saying you won't help me after everything I've done for you? An unknown male voice asked. I tried to catch my mother's reply, but there was silence instead. Usually, Mum was a very calm woman who rarely resorted to shouting. I will not let this one go, Steph, the man continued. I know you're lying. I thought about calling the police, but it could have been too late by the time they arrived. I felt the panic burn the top of my stomach, and my breath quickened like I was preparing for an attack. In a way, I was. Now that Dad was not there anymore to protect us, it was me who had to come to Mum's rescue. And just as I decided to get off my bicycle and enter the house, the door flung open and a tall man appeared on the porch. He seemed to be in his 40s, with thick brown hair slicked back and a red face, probably from all the shouting he had been doing. He looked at me, and my stomach squeezed in response. Okay, I think this is a really, really strong beginning, and thank you, Anna, for sending it in. And I think the things I like in particular about this are three things. Firstly, the story and the setup. So one of the things I always say when you're looking at writing a beginning of a novel is that question of why now? Why precisely are we joining the story at this particular point? Secondly, I think one of the challenges with a beginning is how you bring in information without it feeling like it's being an information dump. And then thirdly, the other thing I really, really like with this start is the voice. I think in these opening 500 words, I've got a really good sense of the voice and the character that we are beginning the story with. So those are the kind of the big picture stuff. And I think Anna's getting it all right. I'm going to start here with the opening sentence here. One remarkable thing about my mother is that she hardly ever cried. I think for me, this is such a good opening sentence for a story. And I think it's because of that for two reasons. So firstly, we're getting this detail about the character, one of the central characters, straight away. One remarkable thing, not a normal thing, one remarkable thing about my mother is that she hardly ever cried. So we know something immediately about one of the characters. But secondly, I think this detail here, that she hardly ever cried. So for me as a reader, I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to find out a moment when she does cry, and this is going to be significant. And when we get to this second paragraph here, in my 16 years, I've only ever seen her cry once, and to this day, it is the only story in my life that is worth telling. And for me, as a start, that's what I want, the only story in my life that is worth telling. This writer, this character isn't wasting our time here. They're getting straight to it and telling us the most interesting, most important thing. So I think as an opening sentence, there's nothing complicated about the language there, but what it does for me in terms of the character, in terms of the story, I think it's brilliant. Then as this opening paragraph goes on, we have this little bit of detail about the protagonist's life. not when I broke my arm, and not even when Dad died. So that's obviously a kind of key piece of information. It's done quite carefully. At the start of the second paragraph, where the writer is in my 16 years, so then we know the age, but it's all done quite subtly. I never feel that we are getting stuff in heavily in terms of information, that the story doesn't pause for it. It's all quite carefully slipped in. And then we have this little bit of information and detail about the mother here in this third paragraph, in this third sentence. And then I think for me, this then just needs to be tweaked a little bit. So the second half of this paragraph. So after Dad's death, he seemed indifferent, but it was also when her stoic strength shone the brightest. So as I was reading that out, I could feel myself tripping up over those words. So firstly, in terms of maybe it's the sound, the stoic strength shone the brightest, just feels a little bit trippy-uppy to me. So I think that just needs rephrasing. And then we have phrases here like putting our lives back on track. Only later there is how much you sacrifice to provide us with stability and a sense of normalcy, things shining the brightest. So those sentences to me just feel a little bit familiar. So I think writing-wise, those phrases and those familiar phrases could be retweaked in something a little bit stronger. I think one of the other things I think could be brought out a little bit more in this beginning is terms of the setting. So we have this detail here. I remember it happened in March because the morning was still cold and misty. The trees were eager to bloom, their green buds peeking from the branches. I think the word peeking there isn't quite right for me. I think it's good that it's nice and active, but it almost feels kind of comic and playful and light. And actually, this piece is slightly darker, so I would change that as a verb. And then as the piece goes on, we have this detail about where the house is. Our house sat atop a small hill, surrounded by the forest, with only one pavement leading into town. This feels a little bit more general to me. So I think a little bit more specifics in the detail I think would be good. And in a similar way, when we get right to the end, and this man comes out of the house, thick brown hair slicked back and a red face, probably from all the shouting, and he's a tall man. Again, for me, these descriptive words feel a little bit general. So again, I think if you were going back through, these could be tightened a little bit. And then the other thing I would mention is just be careful with the use of imagery. So, for example, there's one down here. My breath quickened like I was preparing for an attack. I was met with a shouty, deep and angry like a blooming thunder. I always say with images, I would use as sparingly as possible. They're a very rich detail to add to the mix. So I would choose the most important one or the one with the most significance and kind of knock the other ones back. I love this sequencing. This is the other thing I was going to say up here as well. Our house sat atop a small hill, and then we have the character pedaling uphill and then reaching the front garden. So we get this kind of sequencing going through. It's almost like a kind of mini story. And in a similar way, this sounds a small point, but when the character decides to get off my bicycle and enter the house, the door flung open. So this first bit is what the character's decided to do, and then she's interrupted. And I think with stories, it's when things happen that are unexpected or doing it in a different way you're expecting, which is where interesting things start to happen. And this is a very, very small example of this, but I like it when kind of stories are being interrupted and something different is going on. But I think it's a great ending here. My stomach squeezed in response. So we're at a moment of climax here. So I think as an opening 500 words, this is incredibly strong. I think there's a little bit of tweaking to do with the language, but as I say, the big picture stuff is done extremely effectively, and I think there's a lot you can take and learn from this beginning. So well done, Anna, as an opening to a story.
That sounds really good. Yeah, a really, really strong start. Lots of compliments here coming in from the viewers about Anna's writing. A really interesting point there, as you're talking about like the different types of adjectives, about finding things that are a little bit more specific rather than words that are maybe used quite frequently in writing. So there's some good tips there coming in.
Yeah, and I think I would say when you're writing first draft, and I know when I write first draft, I quite often put placeholders in there because I think you don't want to lose the rhythm of flow, so you get stuff down. But when you go back through, look at those phrases if they feel a little bit familiar. So something like getting a life back on track. when you're writing, just stick it down, but with a bit more thought, I think you can go back and find something stronger. But the bigger picture stuff, that sense of story and immediacy, is so well done there. I would very happily have read further on in that piece. I thought it was a great start, which was partly why I chose it to begin with tonight.
Yeah, it's a good piece to start with, and I was also feeling that I'm quite curious to hear more from the story and what happens next. Cool. Should we dive in straight into the next one?
Yeah, let's go for the next one. Let's keep it moving through. So I've chosen two pieces that are romance this evening. So this first one is romantic comedy, and the second one is more kind of historical romance. So it does it in a slightly different way. But this is the humorous piece. It's by Julia Knight, and this story is called "Say You'll Be There." And the beginning goes at this. There's one swear word in here, so I apologise in advance for my swearing. All right, everyone, time to find your first matches. Anusha, our host for the evening, clicked off her microphone and stepped behind the bar. She grabbed a bottle of rosé and poured a generous glass for a curvy blonde in a cobalt blue wrap dress, while the rest of the bar's patrons eagerly made their way to the tables. Nervous chatter blending with the Arkel's upbeat cover of Gimme Gimme Gimme. I sent Mel, my best friend and roommate, an excited grin and discreet thumbs up from my table in the corner, and received a subtle slash across the throat gesture in return. Swallowing my laughter as my first match sat down at my table, I was momentarily stunned into silence. The man sitting in front of me looked, and this is really the only way I can describe it, like a young Dumbledore. Not the young, hot Dumbledore portrayed by Jude Law, but regular old Dumbledore with baby smooth skin, a long black beard, and long black hair under a flat-topped green felt hat, embellished with gold beads and embroidery around the brim. A broad grin spread across my face as I looked in his essence. Speed dating was fucking awesome. Hi, I'm Victoria, I said, using the alias that our friend Joey had insisted on. He'd been concerned about the possibility of random strangers using our real names to find out where we lived. It's nice to meet you. I glanced down at his name tag, then back up to meet his emerald green eyes. Galadon Wildfire? Is Galadon your real name? It's beautiful. My scrub daddy couldn't wipe the smile off my face. No, Galadon Wildfire is my Dungeons and Dragons character. He's a gnome ranger and a master archer. He's also a skilled tracker of both animals and humans and has a majestic hawk called Thalos as his loyal animal companion. Do you play D&D? Unfortunately, I don't. Maybe you could teach me. I winked at him and leaned forward, tossing my long dark curls over one shoulder, then sliding my elbow along the tabletop, my chin resting on the back of my hand. No, Galadon sighed as he shook his head. I'm looking for a partner, not a project. He looked down at his paper and continued what looked like an elaborate doodle. Taken aback by Galadon's blunt dismissal, a small, slightly incredulous chuckle escaped. Maybe we could still be friends. Ooh, what are you drawing there? I asked. I'm a photographer, but I draw and paint too. I love experiencing other people's art. Wordlessly, Galadon held a beautifully drawn dragon. It had delicate wings with intricate patterns, and I was impressed that he'd somehow managed to make the scales look iridescent with only his blue Bic pen. Wow, that's fantastic. Does your D&D character ride a dragon? No. Exasperated, Galadon glared at me like any idiot would understand that his D&D character wouldn't ride a dragon. He sighed again, louder this time. Okay, I really enjoyed this. I should say that the first novel I wrote was romantic comedy, so I have a soft spot for this genre, and I know from my own experiences how hard it is to write funny. I think it's one of those things that people think that it's an easy thing to do, and honestly, it's one of the hardest things to write because you've got to get the pacing right, you've got to get the timing right, the words have to land in precisely the right place. And I think here that Julie does a really, really good job. I like how she does it through situation, through character, rather than through kind of puns and jokes. I think that's the best way of writing this kind of material. I think as a beginning here, I think there's the humour is definitely its strength, and I enjoyed being with this character. I talked about voice with Anna's piece, and here again with the protagonist. I like her, I'm intrigued by her. I'm quite happy to be in her company. She's making me laugh. I'll continue along in that kind of way. But one of the reasons I wanted to choose this piece was in terms of thinking about the number of characters to introduce at the start and how that works. And if we look at this piece, there's a number of names, there's a number of characters mentioned. So in the opening paragraph, we have the host, Anusha, for the evening. We have somebody else here who isn't mentioned by name. Then we have the protagonist's friend Mel, her best friend and roommate here. Then we have Galadon Wildfire kind of coming in. Then as we go down, we have the protagonist who introduces herself as Victoria, but she's not actually Victoria. That's a name that she's chosen for the evening, so we still don't know her real name. And then we have Jerry, her best friend or her friend, who I presume is another kind of flatmate as well. So in that beginning, we've got several characters introduced, often by name. We don't know very much about them, and the protagonist, we don't know their real name. And I think in terms of grounding the reader, giving the reader a little bit more detail about that central character is crucial. So in Anna's piece, I think that was done extremely well. We had that character set first before we met this kind of the guy who was shouting at the mother, and we found a little bit more about him. Here, I think the protagonist is a little bit kind of lost in the mix, and they're not there in this opening paragraph. And then it's only when they come in here in the second paragraph, and even when they come in, they're feeling a little bit observational. So they're telling us what they're seeing, they're observing what's going on, but we don't learn very much about them actually only towards the end of this extract, when we learn they're a kind of photographer and they're into art and that kind of stuff. We don't know why they're here at this kind of singles night. I might presume they're there because they want to find a partner. I guess that's why you're there as a singles night. But what I mean is we don't know the backstory. What is the history? Is this someone who has just split up with someone, who has never had a boyfriend? Whatever it is, we don't have that little bit of detail there. So I think a little bit more about the central character here will help to kind of pull this out. And I think the other thing that I would say about this central character as a start is I wasn't completely clear what she was feeling about kind of Galadon Wildfire. I wasn't sure if she was excited by him, in awe of him. I mean, she says that speed dating is awesome. She's looking at his essence, but she's not interested in Dungeons and Dragons. So I wasn't quite sure whether she was intrigued by him or whether she was a bit playful and actually she's going to go on to the next one. So I think making that a little bit clearer as well kind of would work well. A couple of the details I would mention. Use of different senses I always think is really, really important, and I love this beginning here. The use of music I think is really, really good. And mixing with the nervous chatter. We've got clicking off the microphones. We've got good use of the different senses here. Say You'll Be There, I think, is a Spice Girls song, if I remember rightly. I think that's a really good title for a romantic comedy. I also really like the use of body language. So you have this detail here where we've got she's giving these gestures to Mel, and then kind of later down, when she winks at Galadon, and we've got this detail how she's sliding her elbows across the tabletop, chin resting on the back of the hand. I think that's done kind of really, really well. Sometimes you don't need all of it. So here we've got Galadon's side as he shook his head. Those two actions are sort of doing the same thing. I think you can probably just have kind of one or the other. But the dialogue is really good. It kind of ticks along very well. A little bit more in the description. So here we've got baby smooth skin, long black beard, long black hair, flat top green felt free graph hat, embroidery around the brim. There feels quite a lot there that I think could be a little bit more specific. So I think that could be tightened a little bit, but you don't want too much extra detail because with a romantic comedy, it's about pace, it's about things kind of ticking over. So I think getting the details right is more important than giving a kind of wealth of kind of information. But as I say, I think that there's a lot of kind of life and humour in what's written here. I think that opening paragraph, I would look at a way of getting the protagonist in. I think that is really, really important. And in fact, we know more about this, the curvy blonde and the cobalt blue wrap dress before we know anything about about the protagonist. I would say there's always this this famous quote by Chekhov. I remember mentioned sometimes where Chekhov's theory was if you have a gun in chapter one, it has to go off somewhere else in the novel. And on a smaller level here, if we've got someone highlighted in a cobalt blue wrap dress at the beginning, I'm hoping that that person will come back in later on. In the same way, in Anna's piece, we were told right in that opening sentence that her mother almost never cried, so we knew that that was going to give us a hint that we were going to get a scene when she did cry. So think very, very carefully about those details. Those opening sentences, that first paragraph, is so important to kind of grab the reader's interest. So bringing the central character out, I think, is the element here that will really help kind of pull the scene together. But as I say, I love the writing. I think that there's voice here, there's humour. It ticks along, and again, I'd be quite happy to read further and find out to what these two characters are about, whether that's going to develop into something longer, or whether it's a setup for then another character that she's going to meet later on the same evening. And just looking at some of the comments, I live in the country says fun right from the get-go, and I think that's a good way of describing what it is I've just read.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that. I kind of found myself chuckling as you were reading it out loud. So, a really fun piece, and a really good opening. As you said there about pace, I really like the kind of conversation, the back and forth they're having, and what you seem to kind of learn, or the little insights you get into these two characters along the way.
Yeah, I think it's done really well, and I think a sort of singles evening is a very good setup for this kind of thing, because it naturally allows you the opportunity for people to meet each other the first time and have those kind of first impressions. And possibly here, I think the protagonist is doing. We're getting more about who she's meeting than who the protagonist is. So it's remembering that we need to know about them as well, and make sure that they are active rather than being, you know, our eyes and ears. They need to be in the mix as well. But I think it's a really good start, and as you're saying, I think the pace of it is great, and that's what you want from a romantic comedy. You need the pace kind of ticking over, and keeping those jokes kind of coming along.
Yeah, definitely. So I mentioned a little bit at the beginning that you kind of host these types of sessions regularly as part of the How to Write a Novel course. And you also host kind of master classes where you invite guests and published authors to kind of talk about their books and their writing process. Who are some of the guests that you've had recently on the course?
We've had a real mix. So I try to get a variety of guests, because I think it's really useful to hear people from different orders. So just different genres. So just looking through the last couple of months, last week we had Hazel Gaynor, who's a New York Times best-selling kind of historical novelist, talking about her most recent book, The Last Lifeboat. The previous month we had Nick Binge, who is a kind of science fiction, a sort of dystopian, futuristic time travel, stroke horror, stroke everything kind of book, which was brilliant, but in a completely different way. Joe Furness, a writer who wrote a book called Dead Mile, which is this sort of locked room mystery about a murder that takes place in a traffic jam. Kelly Garrett, a single white woman, kind of brilliant thriller, kind of set in New York. Sun Yi Dean, a book called The Book Eaters, which was a kind of gothic stroke horror book. So I'm trying to find authors who I suppose are coming from different genres, but having kind of experiences that the writers in the on the course can relate to. Because I think once your heart start hearing writers talk about writing, then I think it feels more relatable. It feels something that you can do. I think you can see those joins. Actually, when all these people started out writing, they weren't, connected in publishing, or they had, nepotism or anything. They were the same as everyone else on the course. They had an idea and a hope and a vision, and through hard work and a bit of luck in places, then they got there. So I think being able to see those journeys makes it feel, realistic and kind of possible for you. This is something that you can do. And I think having that opportunity to ask them questions, and I tend to do a little bit of interviewing, but as much as possible, I leave the space for the students to ask the questions of the writers. And sometimes as well, a little bit like we do here, I tend to post up an extract from the most recent book, and then we talk about the writing and the craft of it. And I find that fascinating. I can sit listen to writers talk about writing all day long. It's something I can love doing, but it's it's good having those different opinions there, and it's fascinating hearing everybody's journey to publication. And more often than not, they're not straightforward. Everyone's got books they've tried to get an agent, and it failed, and then actually the Hazel Gaynor we had last week. She wrote her first book, which was the bestseller, which was based around the Titanic. She couldn't get published and had it self-published, and then was picked up and then became a bestseller. And the book wasn't any different. It just seemed to be that was the journey for her that worked. But I think that's quite hard for her, that she started, she thought this was it, and then it didn't happen, and then went down a different route. And I think hearing those experiences again, I think it's fascinating, and hopefully of benefit to those people who are thinking about writing a novel.
Yeah, that's super interesting to hear, like how people kind of went about it. I think so often, like you said, you kind of read, books and you think, oh, this is incredible, and you kind of forget that actually, that doesn't just come on the page. It's really interesting to hear about, like the stages that they kind of go through with their writing, and as you said, also how they actually went on to get published, and it's not always a straightforward journey.
Absolutely, and a lot of writing is in the rewriting. I think that's the other important thing to say. So you see those finished books and think, well, I could never write that, but actually you need to remember that those books will have been through 4, 5, 6, however many drafts to get to that point, which is completely different to what we're looking at here, which is more kind of early drafts of material. And I think when you're writing, and certainly on the course, the challenge or the ask of the students is to try and get that first draft down over the course of the 3 months or so, because once you've got that down there, then you can get stuck into work properly, and then you can turn that into a book. And I think that most of the writers I see, their first drafts would be all over the place, and they would be the first to admit that. But in the rewriting, then the magic kind of comes alive.
Yeah, I think that's so great to see, and why it's good to get those words down on the page. All right, should we move on to the next one? I think this will be.
Yes, let's go for the next one.
All right.
And this is written by, I think it's Blee, B-L-I, Blee or Bly. And this is romantic fiction again, but it's done in a different way. And actually, this section isn't romantic. It's called Remnants of You. And it begins as follows. It's the cool sounds of Funkadelic that roams through the ears of the youth here in the Carolinas. It's 1971, and to be honest, every teenager in America was either blasting Funkadelic or Pink Floyd, making their parents crazy by having them slam bedroom doors and pulling pillows over their ears. Parents really don't understand. Kids were riding their skateboards down the street, hanging out on the corners, waiting for some new record to be released, or harassing the ice cream man who always knew how to drive slow, making sure every kid on the block got a chance, to run to the truck that always delivered icy cold heaven. Most teenagers today won't understand how bell-bottoms changed a kid's life. If you didn't own a pair, the record would stop, gasps filled the room, and you would be asked to leave. It was as if we had our own club, the BBA, Bell Bottoms Association. Kids from all over the city would line up on one block just to show off their new bell bottoms that either their mum or dad had bought them. You had the spandex disco flower print that was so versatile. Girls were wearing them to school and for gym. Then you had your blue jean ones with the white flower print. Stacey Callie always wore hers every Friday night, thinking no one could outdo her style. You had the pale green ones with what looked like a long flower stem cut at the bottom. And only one girl on the whole block had those, and she got them from New York. You had your polyester plain or multi-patterns that every working mum wore. You had your yellow spandex ones with matching jackets that only the true hippies wore. They got theirs from California. There were the swell bell-bottoms that looked like colourful mirrored glass that Betty Lou wore. She was known as the block's biggest flirt. All the girls would talk about her and stick their noses up at her while secretly wanting a pair of their own. Judy Bland was the it girl on our block. Every boy loved her, and every girl wanted to be her. She had only one look that never disappeared. She always wore blue jean bell bottoms with a white top that she tied in the front. Every teenage girl younger than her would try to tie their shirts in the front, showing their stomachs, then later undoing it right before going home. And let's not forget the jean bell-bottoms with the rainbow stripes going down the pleats of the leg. If you owned a pair, you were popular, and many would try to get their parents to buy them, but would come out to the shop with a look-alike that was cheaper. You would get picked on if the colours weren't right. You would also get hazed by the older teenagers. Then there was our crew. We all wore our blue jean bell-bottoms with our own signature style. We all had drawings on our jeans and called it art. There was Joey, who came up with the idea. He was a two-time divorced kid who wanted to work at his dad's car shop after high school. Ronnie, who knew all things math, who wanted to work for NASA after school. Rocky, who was the artist of the group, who came up with our awesome logo, BBA, who knew not what he wanted to do as we graduated. Holly, the party planner of the group, all she ever talked about was one day getting married to a musician from a rock band and touring the world. Me, Mel, short for Melanie, I wanted a world-famous author one day. I had so many ideas and scraps of paper everywhere, full of them. Okay, so this is a piece that I've chosen for a couple of reasons. I think it's beautifully evocative of the time period that it's writing, and I think it's a really good example of how you can capture a particular setting and a particular era. And I think one of the things that you want to do with the start of a book is to ground the reader as quickly and as firmly as possible. And I think the author here does that through two things in particular. Does it through the music, so we have funkadelic, we have kind of Pink Floyd, and then we have the fashion. And I think when you're capturing a setting or a period, quite often it's the smaller details rather than the bigger details that capture precisely when a story is. And I think sometimes when we talk about setting, it's very easy to think about the where, but the when is kind of crucial too. And it's in those little details, whether it's the music, whether it's the fashion, whether it's the decor, whether it's the adverts, whether it's what people are eating. All these details kind of build together. There's a brilliant book by Rick Moody called The Ice Storm, which was out, God, quite a long time ago now, but that fabulously evocative of the 1970s, and this reminded me a little bit of that. I was right there instantly. And we're located here in the Carolinas. It's 1971. So by the end of these first couple of lines, we know exactly kind of where and when we are. So I think the author does a really, really good job in setting that out. The other thing I really like this as a structure is there is a sort of funneling going on, by which I mean at this beginning here, we're talking quite generally about the Carolinas, about America, about the bell bottoms kind of more generally. And then as we go down, we start getting some characters' names, but they aren't close to the author. So we had Stacey Kelly, we had one before, didn't we? Oh, no, we didn't, sorry. Mixing up here, but Stacey Kelly, and then we've got Betty Lou. We had Judy Bland, but we've got double names here, so we're feeling that these are people that were well known, but they're not close to the key characters in the book. And then when we get to this final paragraph, we're now getting the characters just called by their first name, so we're now getting closer. So we've got Joey, we've got Ronnie, we've got Rocky, we've got Holly, and then finally here we've got Melanie. And so we don't get introduced by name to the character here until the end of the 500 words. But I think in a strange way, unlike the previous piece, I feel that I know this character better by the time we get there. We've got a good sense of who she is from how she's describing things. So although she's not talking specifically about her life, actually we know quite a lot about her in terms of her kind of style, in terms of what music she likes, and that funneling of focus, kind of bringing the reader in, is a very, very effective way of starting a story. So although it's beginning, generally it's doing so for a point, and it kind of gets kind of focused in. If we look at this opening paragraph, I'm sort of focusing a little bit on the opening paragraphs this evening. couple of phrases. So to be honest, I'm not sure why we need that there particularly, because I don't think that there's nothing kind of particularly striking or has to be truthful about that. So I'm not sure if that is needed there kind of necessarily. And I think there's a slight repetition in these early couple of sentences. So we've got, you know, cool sense of funkadelic that roams through the ears. Roams is a great verb, through the ears of the youth. But then every teenage America was either blasting Funkadelic or Pink Floyd. And so the ears of the youth, every teenager in America is sort of similar. And also having focused on the Carolinas, to go to every teenager in America felt too wide. I would stick in the Carolinas at this point. And then in a similar way, we've got this slight repetition that all this makes their parents crazy. They're putting pillows over their ears, slamming bedroom doors. Parents really didn't understand. I think that's sort of self-evident from this opening, from the previous sentence. So again, I'm not sure that's necessarily essential to have in there, and I think you probably kind of tweak that out. And then we move in sort of outside, having been inside with the slamming of the doors and the pillows over the ears. And the one person who does seem to understand the children is the ice cream man. So he seems to be the one adult who kind of gets it. And I think here this is quite an interesting point to bring in. And there's probably a little bit more that you can do with this as well, because although these teenagers are trying to be kind of cool and trendy and listening to kind of Funkadelic and Pink Floyd and the rest of it, actually they're still running after the ice cream van. So that contrast between the two is a really kind of effective kind of combination. When we get into the bell bottoms, I think this is just a touch too long for me. And I think when you've got a phrase that's repeated, so we've got this "you had" here, you had, this, then you had this there, you had here, you had here, you had here. So we've got, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 uses the same phrase, which creates a sort of sense of build, but I think it's done just in a little bit too much detail for me. So I would thin that out a little bit. Possibly this paragraph here, where we're going away from the characters and talking more generally again, I think for me that one could probably come out just to speed things up, and I would probably take a couple of those out somewhere as well, just to keep things kind of moving through. But I really like that focus on that one particular detail. I think the bell bottoms gives the piece a little bit of focus, and it allows you to create this contrast between the different characters. And as I say, that funneling going through, from the kind of general down to the specific, it is such an effective start. And in terms of creating the setting, I think it's brilliant. I mean, although this is romantic fiction, we've got nothing romantic in here yet. I guess that's going to come and that's going to follow. But in terms of grounding the reader, setting us precisely where we are, I think it's a brilliant beginning in a different way to the previous pieces. But again, it's a very, very effective start.
Cool. That's so interesting to see, like, all the different ways that you can kind of approach the beginning of a novel and how you build up that setting without, as you said, necessarily introducing that main character kind of like early on.
Yeah, I think, and that character is introduced, but she's introduced through voice and through how she's describing the scene. So although that beginning isn't a particular moment, it's not a particular kind of incident that's going on, I think actually we learn so much about Mel from that start. And I think I've probably said on previous occasions, whenever I talk to kind of literary agents and publishers, one of the things that they look out for more often than not in submissions is voice. And I think all three examples we've looked at so far are all really rich in voice. And I think you get a good sense of voice in those opening pages. And that's not an easy thing to do. So that should be applauded. And as I say, I think grounding the reader is such a hard thing to do. But I think when you do it and you get it done and out the way right at the start, then you can get on with what matters. And I think, again, I think that last author did it extremely well.
Yeah, definitely a piece that I would love to read more from. In the last kind of break that we had, we spoke a little bit about the masterclasses that you host as part of the How to Write a Novel course. You spoke a little bit there about voice, which I know that is something that you kind of talk about on the course as well. What are some of the other features that are part of the course, and what can students kind of expect to learn if they are to enroll in this course, which I should mention, it's a 3-month course that has kind of like weekly classes. But yeah, Tom, you can speak more about it.
Just very quickly before we go on to the next piece. So, the structure of the course, I sort of wrote, it's meant to be, the idea is it's sort of NaNoWriMo meets masterclass. So the idea is that you're writing a full draft over 3 months, but you're getting a daily video, daily little kind of précis from me on a different kind of writing theme, and those are structured week by week. So we like have a week on structure, or we have a week on character, or a week on description, and then within that you get a different lesson kind of each day, and we try and roughly follow the shape of the book. So the first week you're looking at the beginning of the book, the middle of the course, you're focusing on the centre of the book, and the last week you're kind of focusing in on the end. And I was trying to, when I was writing the course, to try and balance out kind of learning how to write as you go along, but also giving people the space to write. I mean, what I want as much as possible, and we've had a group that's finished this week, is to get those writers to come out with a full first draft, or as close to a full first draft as possible. So hopefully we're kind of there to kind of encourage that. There's something for me about doing that in a group community setting. It's not an easy thing to do, to write a book. It could be very isolating writing a book. So to being able to do that in tandem with other people is invaluable, both in terms of getting their encouragement and also their feedback. So each Friday we have what we call Feedback Friday, where you can share work with your fellow students. And again, I think that's kind of really useful and beneficial. And we do a number of these live editing sessions over the duration of the course as well. I do those as part of my Monday masterclass sessions too.
I've seen a few questions here come in for people who are tuning in. So I wanted to, I know that you mentioned that you speak a bit about plot, and you do a week on plot, or multiple weeks on plot. Do you have any hints for how to kind of plot a literary novel?
That's a good question. I mean, my slightly boring answer is it's different for everybody in terms of how much plotting you want to do. And I think some writers will want, things plotted in triplicates. So, for example, the literary writer William Boyd is a good example of someone who plots everything out pretty much before he starts. He knows everything that's going to happen. I interviewed Claire Fuller, who won the Costa Prize a few years ago, and she literally starts with a character and a setting for the opening scene, and then off she goes and has no kind of plotting at all. So everyone is sort of somewhere between those kind of two extremes. The one thing I would say is, if it's a literary novel, is that generally that would mean that there's more focus on character. So rather than thinking about the plot, I would say I would spend that time thinking about that central character, the protagonist, and the sort of the journey of change that they are going to go on. So that's where I would spend my time if I wanted to focus on writing a literary novel. But as I say, everybody's different on how much they plot, and it always fascinates me where I read a book and then I interview the writer and I assume that they're a plotter, and they're exactly the opposite, and vice versa. You can't tell at all. Everyone's different.
That's really funny, yeah. And finally, before we go on to the last one, one question here about the course. How interactive would you say that it is? It's kind of a mix between being self-driven and being interactive. But what would you say, Tom?
Yeah, so you're getting a daily video each day, which is 10 to 15 minutes long, and then there's a lesson attached if you want a deeper dive into that, which will take you about an hour. They're all up on the forum, so you're in with the other students, kind of chatting and working through. I'm available as well as the tutor to discuss, and then I do a weekly kind of live session where we meet and chat. But I think everyone finds their own balance. I think some people are there a lot on the forums. They like chatting. Other people want to get their heads down and write. Some people kind of ask me questions directly. Other people will kind of interact more with the other students. Everyone's kind of slightly different. So I think we've tried to structure it where it's flexible. So it's sort of what works with you. And I think the more I've taught writing, the more I've written writing over the years. I think one of the key things really is to understand what kind of a writer you are and what works for you. So I'm always slightly hesitant to be prescriptive on how you should do things, and I've tried to create a course that creates the space to find what works for you as a writer. I think that's how you're going to get the best book, I would say, rather than it being too much one thing or another.
Yeah, that sounds really good, and it's been really interesting to hear how, as you say, like each student kind of finds their own balance, their own pace, and kind of they approach it slightly differently. All right, so yeah, let's dive into the last piece. Bring it.
Yeah.
here.
So a different genre again here. So we've gone for steampunk this time. So for those of you who don't know steampunk, it's sort of historical sci-fi. I think it's sort of set in a sort of parallel kind of Victorian kind of era, kind of 19th century kind of universe where you're using the kind of technology of the time. Is my very bad description of steampunk, and I apologise for any steampunks in the room who can do a far better description of what it is for me. But that's roughly what it's set as. Anyway, so this is a piece by Dora, and it's the start of the beginning of a book called "The Storms Burned and Slaughtered the Skies." A profound sense of wrongness permeated everything. Amidst the industrial haze, the sun and the moon kissed, and pigeons plummeted downward, while men soared with wings unfurled. Up was down, down was up. The universe had veered off course. Not that anyone cared. Only Jedediah Ashcroft wept silently as the deck lurched and swayed beneath his feet. His senses were assaulted by the acrid scent of coal and oil, the sharp tang of burnt metal lingering in the back of his throat. Each breath was a struggle against thick, polluted air, coming in short, ragged gasps. His throat burned, and his heart raced with panic, threatening to tear itself free. He knew, of course, that the Skylark could withstand this sudden storm. Its ironclad hull was designed to endure far worse, but his mind was a tempest of its own, with thoughts racing a mile a minute. He glanced at the dark, roiling clouds above, their churning mass threatening to engulf the ship entirely. Was this the end? Had he died and ended up in hell? Bile rose in his throat, thick and acrid, the taste of salt and metal filling his mouth as he fought to remain upright. As the wind howled and the ship groaned under the strain, Jedediah's mind whirred, searching for something, anything to hold on to, some semblance of reality to cling to. The railing! He reached out, fingers trembling, and grasped the rain-slicked railing, its cold, rusted surface biting into his palm. Then he shut his eyes tight, hoping against hope for the storm to pass. Just then, a strong gust of wind tore through the rigging, the ropes snapping like whips in the gale. Jedediah staggered, nearly losing his footing as the deck pitched beneath him. His breath hitched in his throat, a strangled gasp, as he felt a hand on his shoulder steadying him with a firm, reassuring grip. He smiled faintly at the familiar scent of cedarwood and bergamot, a balm to his frazzled nerves, and opened his eyes. Elliot Sterling. Jedediah, focus on me, Elliot urged, his voice cutting through the storm with practiced authority. Ellie, is this real? Jedediah asked, eyes still shut. Mm-hmm, his friend replied, his voice a low, reassuring hum. He pulled Jedediah into a warm embrace, and as Jedediah sank into Elliot's arms, his racing heart steadied, and his panic gave way to a fragile sense of calm. The warmth of Elliot's body against his own was a lifeline, anchoring him to something solid, something real. He focused on the rhythmic rise and fall of Elliot's chest, willing himself to match its steady pace. His mind drifted to the pocket watch always nestled in Elliot's waistcoat. In 6 seconds, it had ticked only 5 times. Even time slows in his presence, Jedediah thought, forcing his eyes open. Meeting Elliot's kindly gaze, Jedediah managed a shaky smile, though it felt strained upon his lips. Jedi, are you all right? Elliot asked, concern etched in the front of his brow. Okay, so this is quite a different piece to the previous extracts that we've looked at, but I think in many ways, again, it's a really strong start in a different way. And I think one of the things I really like about this, and in terms of how the piece is grounding the reader, is through the use of the different senses. I think if you're writing something, whether it's fantasy, whether it's sci-fi, whether it's steampunk, whether it's historical, you need to find a way to kind of bridge that gap between the reader in the present day and whatever it is they're reading. And the easiest way to do that, I think, quite often, is to use those different senses which the reader can relate to. So if we look at this second paragraph here, things like the acrid scent of coal and oil, the sharp tang of burnt metal lingering in the back of his throat. Each breath was a struggle against the thick, polluted we're getting a good sense of the world that we're in, and we're doing it through the senses. And if we go down here as the piece goes on, we've got the smell of his friend here, the familiar scent that works really well. There's another detail as well, which I really liked. I can't quite find that now, but I think using those different senses, I think kind of works kind of extremely effectively. The start here, again, a little bit like the last piece, is general at the beginning. So we're getting this kind of general kind of worldview kind of summary before we go in. And for me, I paused slightly at this opening sentence. A profound sense of wrongness permeated everything. There's bits of it I like. You've got this alliteration with profound and permeated, but I sort of paused on the word profound, and I should pause on the word everything. I think as a general rule, thing is always a word I would try and avoid when I write, and if I edit, I would try and take out. So everything feels a little bit too general for me. I think when we get in this second sentence, we get this lovely detail, the industrial haze, the sun and the moon kissed, the pigeons plummeted downwards whilst men soared with their wings unfurled. So here we've got this sweep and this kind of this sense of the world that we're in. We've got this third sentence here, which is the fourth one, which is a repeat of the first here. The universe had veered off course. A profound sense of wrongness permeated everything. I think, as I say, that opening sentence for me could be a little bit stronger, but the detail in the middle here I kind of really, really like. Here we've got a single sentence paragraph, which is used, or you should use them very much for effect and for emphasis. So use them sparingly, and then they'll have impact. So here we've got this contrast, not that anyone cared, and then that introduces this central character. Only Jedediah Ashcroft was wept silently. So he's the one who did care. Contrast here. So if you're using a single sentence paragraph, that's the way to do it. I really like the use of different verbs. We've got the deck lurching, swaying, sentences were assaulted, lingering here. His throat burned, his heart raced. There's lots and lots of really good kind of active verbs, and a lot in quick succession. And when you're writing action, I think finding a way to get as many verbs in there as possible is a really good way of making stuff come alive. And I think here, this would be an example of where that's done kind of extremely well. I like too how we start with heart here, and then we go on to the mind. We've got the storm, and his mind was a tempest of its own. I love that link there. I think that works very well. Slight repetition here. I would say the heart racing and then thoughts racing. So that needs kind of tweaking a little bit. We've got the clouds above. I'll just mention this as a final point because I'm aware we're up against time. He glanced at the dark, roaring clouds above. I'm always slightly wary of, if you're with a point of view character, I think you can assume that we can see as the reader what they can see. So rather than he glanced at the dark, roaring clouds above, you can just go straight into the roaring clouds above. We can go straight in there. We don't need that he glanced. So anytime you've got a sentence where it says, he looked, she saw, whatever it is, you don't need that detail if we're with that character. I think you can assume that we're seeing what they're seeing. So that can just be kind of tweaked a little bit there. And I think the only other thing I would say with this as a beginning here is this action stuff and this moment of panic works kind of really, really well at the start. And then when the friend comes, then that is dampened down immediately. So that tension's build up is kind of released, and almost possibly too much, I would say. I personally would have built out this scene a little bit more before we got to that point. And then it's only when we get right to the very, very end of the piece where we've got Elias' concern etched in the furrow of his brow, that then the kind of tension picks back up again. So I would say the opening of this could be expanded out, and then when Elliot comes in, I think that tension just needs to be kind of ticking over a little bit more, I would say. But again, I think it's a really good kind of strong beginning, a good example of a good piece in this genre, and lots of action. And again, I think lots for the author to be pleased with what they have produced here.
Great, amazing. So fun to see something that's like in a slightly different genre. I've been genuinely very, very impressed by all the writing that's been submitted. So it's been really cool to see.
It's been lovely to read. Now, actually, I have to say, I mean, a lot of these pieces, and I think sometimes with editing, I think sometimes people with think when you're editing a work, it's about changing mistakes and correcting things. And actually, I think that most of my time spent as an editor is thinking, how can I make this piece better? How can I bring out more clearly what it is that the author is trying to say? And when you've got good starting points like this for me is where I find editing fascinating. It's like, okay, how can we tweak and improve this to bring this out still further? But the starting points are all kind of strong and intriguing and interesting.
I think that's a really good point. I think if you haven't worked with an editor before, it might be a bit tricky to kind of know like what that relationship is like and what role they play and what they kind of aim to do when they come in. So that's a really nice point about what you do when you kind of go in and try and improve that piece and bring those bits out.
It should be, yeah, it should be creative and collaborative. It's not correcting someone's homework. It's it should be a constructive relationship. And I think the best, as a writer, that the editors I enjoyed the most are the ones where they have they've engaged with the material, and then we talked about how to improve things, and that to me is what it should be about.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Tom, for kind of taking the time. I feel like this hour has absolutely flown by. It was really great to see, all the feedback that you had on the pieces. Before we wrap up, anything else to mention about the course? I know that I've kind of banged on about it a little bit. Is there anyone in particular that you think would really benefit from taking this course? Who is it kind of aimed at?
I think I would come with an idea in mind. I think if you know what it is you want to write, you don't have to have it completely fleshed out. But with that starting point, I think if you come to the course where you want to write a novel but you don't know what it is, I would suggest people kind of come back. I mean, the courses we run kind of several times a year, so you can come back to a later cohort, but have that idea, work it out, and then come fresh, ready to start writing. Would be my advice. But it's designed in particular, to start, from scratch, from the beginning of the book. But we've had people who are doing the course who've never written a novel before. I've had students who've written several before. So it's designed, and the teaching is designed to work at whatever stage of your writing career you're at. But hopefully, it's there to help you write the book, and I think that's what people get out of it.
Yeah, and I saw someone here asking in the chat if you offer editing. If you do join the course, Tom does run exactly this type of session for his students, and the courts are a lot smaller. You're not competing against another 1,000 people to try and get featured. He does trying to get to everyone on the course at least once throughout the 3 months. If you are interested, our next course is starting next week on September 2nd. And we actually have a promo code here to share as well. So if you use the code, let's see if that can come up. Yes, if you use the code editing5, that will give you $250 off. So it's 20%, and that's bringing the price down to $9.99. If that feels a bit hefty, you can also pay in installments and spread the cost over 4 months. Go to reedsy.com/learning to learn more and to sign up. I'll also include the link in the description along with the coupon code. Once again, thank you so much, Tom. And also a big thanks to everyone for tuning in, for sending in your writing. It's been really, really great to see, and I hope you guys learned something along the way.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you to everyone who submitted. It was fascinating working through the pieces. And the other thing I just wanted to say very quickly was that the course is on kind of regularly. So the next date after that, I think, is the end of October. So if you're interested in taking the course, but you haven't got an idea ready to start this week, maybe think about joining the course, later on in the year.
Yes, exactly. We'll hopefully also run another session like this ahead of that cohort in September, October. So keep your eyes peeled for that. Thanks again, everyone. Have a good evening or afternoon, depending on where you guys are.
Cheers now.
All right, bye.